The butterfly effect. A concept that states that small causes can have larger effects, originally used in the context of weather prediction but later applied to many areas, including human systems. The Baader-Meinhof phenomenon. Also known as the frequency illusion, this phenomenon occurs when something you've recently noticed, experienced, or been told about suddenly crops up everywhere. The endowment effect. The endowment effect is a bias in which people ascribe more value to things merely because they own them. The McGurk effect. A phenomenon that demonstrates an interaction between hearing and vision in speech perception. The illusion occurs when the auditory component of one sound is paired with the visual component of another sound, leading to the perception of a third sound. The pratfall effect. The phenomenon where people will like you more after you make a mistake, but only if they believe you are a competent person. It makes the person seem more human and vulnerable. Pareidolia. The psychological phenomenon where people see recognizable shapes, like faces, in unrelated stimuli, such as clouds or inanimate objects. The Dunning-Kruger effect. A cognitive bias in which people with limited knowledge or competence in a domain overestimate their own ability. The Benjamin Franklin effect. A psychological finding that a person who has done someone a favor is more likely to do another favor for that person than they would be if they had received a favor from that person. The gambler's fallacy. The mistaken belief that if something happens more frequently than normal during a given period, it will happen less frequently in the future, or vice versa. The paradox of choice. The observation that more choices can lead to less satisfaction, having too many options can lead to decision paralysis and increased dissatisfaction with one's choice. Zonda. The realization that each random passerby is living a life as vivid and complex as your own, populated with their own ambitions, friends, routines, worries, and inherited craziness. Cryptomnesia. Occurs when a forgotten memory returns without it being recognized as such by the subject, who believes it is something new and original. The Zeigarnik effect. The psychological tendency to remember an uncompleted task rather than a completed one. The placebo effect. A beneficial effect, produced by a placebo drug or treatment, that cannot be attributed to the properties of the placebo itself, and must therefore be due to the patient's belief in that treatment. The cheerleader effect. The phenomenon where individuals appear more attractive in a group than in isolation. The overview effect. An experience that transforms astronauts' perspective of the planet and mankind's place upon it, often featuring profound feelings of awe and a renewed sense of responsibility for taking care of the environment. The Capgras delusion. A psychiatric disorder in which a person holds a delusion that a friend, spouse, parent, or other close family member or pet has been replaced by an identical imposter. The Peter Principle. An observation that in an organizational hierarchy, every employee will rise or get promoted to his or her level of incompetence. The nocebo effect. A detrimental effect on health produced by psychological or psychosomatic factors such as negative expectations of treatment or prognosis. The focusing effect. The tendency for people to place too much importance on one aspect of an event, causing an error in accurately predicting the utility of a future outcome. The anchoring effect. The tendency to rely too heavily on the first piece of information offered the anchor when making decisions. Apophenia. The tendency to perceive connections and meaning between unrelated things, such as seeing patterns in random data. The Google effect. Also known as digital amnesia, this is the tendency to forget information that can be found readily online by using internet search engines. The Pygmalion effect. The phenomenon whereby higher expectations lead to an increase in performance. The framing effect. The cognitive bias where people decide on options based on whether the options are presented with positive or negative connotations, for example, as a loss or a gain. The Tetris effect. After spending a long time on an activity, you might find yourself thinking about it even when you're not doing it. For example, people who have played Tetris for hours might see falling blocks when they close their eyes. The bystander effect. A social psychological theory that states that individuals are less likely to offer help to a victim when other people are present. The sunk cost fallacy. The misconception you're more likely to continue with a project or event if you've already invested a lot of money, time, or effort into it, even when continuing is not the best course of action. The golem effect. The phenomenon whereby lower expectations placed upon individuals either by supervisors or the individual themselves lead to poorer performance. The decoy effect. A phenomenon in consumer behavior where consumers will tend to have a specific change in preference between two options when also presented with a third option that is asymmetrically dominated. The Forer effect. The phenomenon that explains why individuals find vague, general personality descriptions as highly accurate for them specifically, often exploited in horoscopes and fortune-telling. The hedonic treadmill. The observed tendency of humans to quickly return to a relatively stable level of happiness despite major positive or negative events or life changes. The spotlight effect. The belief that people are paying more attention to you than they actually are. The Rosenthal effect. The theory that the greater the expectation placed upon people, the better they perform. It is a form of the Pygmalion effect. The endowment effect. The tendency for people to ascribe more value to things merely because they own them. The Mandela effect. A phenomenon where a large number of people remember something in a particular way, but it turns out to be incorrect. The mere exposure effect. A psychological phenomenon by which people tend to develop a preference for things merely because they are familiar with them. The halo effect. The tendency for an impression created in one area to influence opinion in another area. For instance, perceiving someone as attractive can lead to the assumption they have a more desirable personality. The Horns effect. The cognitive bias that occurs when a negative impression of a person influences the perception of their other traits. The von Restorff effect. Also known as the isolation effect, it predicts that when multiple similar objects are present, the one that differs from the rest is more likely to be remembered. Thanks for watching. Let me know if you have any requests. Also, I'd love it if you follow me.